Made for Me, Chapter 31. It was with that attitude that Danielle opened the doors and windows to her flat, releasing the air that had been trapped during her absence. She enjoyed the cooler breeze of fall coming off the lake. The week after Labor Day, the heat dissipated and leaves turned from green to orange with the efficiency of a Swiss watch. Monday she greeted Glenda warmly, and the two spoke more that morning than they had in the previous months. Johann came by to ask about her holiday, and she listened to him recount his disgust at the clubs in London. When he started telling her about Tokyo, he told her the dance mixes were superior to anything, even topping Belgium. When he started to do a dance interpretation of the locals, she laughed so hard Glenda poked her head over the cubicle to see what was going on. At lunch, she heard the familiar two tapping at the door. "Good afternoon," she greeted Lars. He wore an imperial blue shirt with a muted yellow tie. He was really mixing things up post-vacation. His eyes took her in like he was seeing a new person. "It's my tan," she thought ruefully. "Vacation must have been satisfying," he said easily. "You got a lot of color, and I heard you laughing all the way down the hall." "Have you ever seen Johann dance when he's doing the interpretive movements of a foreign culture?" she asked. She didn't wait for an answer as she laughed out loud. Lars smiled broadly in return. "You?" she asked him. "Did you stay here or leave?" "I went to my home in the country." "Aren't you way too young to have a place in the country?" Lars's grin spread. "I think you might have an incorrect perception of those who have country homes." She shrugged, adjusting her earphone. "Perhaps, so leave me to my blissful ignorance as I get back to work." It wasn't Lars's fault she'd gotten involved with a client, and any animosity she'd felt towards him for being her boss and a professional had long since gone. "There is one thing you didn't comment on," Lars said, his tone of voice altering. Danielle waited expectantly. "Your numbers." "For today?" Lars shook his head slowly. "No, the total under your management." For the first time that day, Danielle had a sinking feeling. It must have been reflected on her face, for Lars told her to go ahead and take a look. She pulled her eyes from him, but felt him watching her as she typed out the query. She unconsciously leaned forward. "How is this possible?" she asked, staring at him. He only smiled. Her total was up another 1.6 billion. Lars turned to leave, and she asked him to wait. 600 million was from a variety of clients, but a full billion was assigned to a single entity. "What's MRD1?" she asked. "Is that another internal pooling of money?" Lars put his hand on the doorframe and looked over his shoulder. "That's me." His eyes lingered a split second more, then he left. "No big deal," Danielle told herself. Her fingers felt thick as she moved them across the keyboard. Placing funds under the direction of another trader in a firm wasn't technically a conflict of interest, and was actually done all the time in the States. Her discomfort came from the pressure of the enormous amount of money being Lars's own funds. She thought of what David would say, and she heard him as clearly as if he were in the room. "It's just more zeros." "It has nothing to do with the fact that I'm no longer with Andre," she told herself. Lars was too objective to make a decision involving money based upon any emotion of any sort. After work, Danielle went to Lonnie's apartment and sampled the restaurants for the spa menu. She loved the squash soup and pot roast, but felt the flavor of the macaroni and cheese fell short. Danielle refrained from asking about Andre until she was at the door. "Did he come to the restaurant?" She'd asked with the hesitancy of someone who didn't really want to know the answer. In one of the few times during their acquaintance, Lonnie's mouth turned down. "Was he there with someone else?" Lonnie answered with a look of distaste. "The blonde, the one who was in the party that he used to come in with." "I asked for it," Danielle scolded herself. Still, going from wanting to marry one woman to dating another in such a short time was pretty harsh. Well, maybe not. If it had been 5 weeks since they'd last been together, she certainly didn't mind looking at Lars with an appraising eye, so why should she be bothered by Andre doing the same? She was in no position to be casting emotional stones. Even so, Danielle erred on the side of caution. "Can I just come by to see you and Stephen, or do I have to schedule it in advance?" "Just come in," Lonnie told her. "It's more your restaurant than his." Danielle was going to have to be brave and face the situation like the trader she was. If she could handle nearly $7 billion in trading, she could handle seeing Andre with a blonde on his arm. The Friday before the annual MRD client event in San Moritz, Danielle attended an employee-wide meeting. Lars gave details on the discounts the company was providing at the local hotels in case the 2-hour drive or train ride back wasn't conducive to those who had been drinking. Danielle did her best to stare straight ahead and look interested. Technically, Andre was the account contact point, and it would be him, not Georgi and Leda, who would be in attendance. As Danielle rode the gondola above the town of San Moritz, the narrow streets meandered underneath, and the magnificent fall colors of the maple trees made her miss the northwest. Glenda was sitting next to her and touched her arm. "I have some bad news," she said in an undertone. "Andre did confirm at the last minute, and he'll be here with a guest." "Of course he is welcome to come," Danielle said, reciting the only diplomatic line she could think of. "I did take the liberty of changing around the seating arrangement so you wouldn't have to sit beside him, however." Danielle awarded Glenda a glance of extreme thanks. Later that evening, Danielle sat between Glenda and her physician husband, the conversation easy and the food wonderful. Danielle had glimpsed Andre and his date through the crowd, and sure enough, it was the same blonde from her first night at Monroe's. To use Lonnie's words, it was clear they were a thing. The woman held herself with all the posture of a beautiful person who knew that every man would glance her way, as would a good many of the women, Danielle included. It appeared to her that Andre was going out of his way to be overly touchy with his date. First his hands on her back, then in her hair. Every time Danielle glanced his way, some part of him was invariably touching some part of the blonde next to him. She did her best to ignore his part of the room, giving her complete attention to those at her table. When the dinner was finished, the group moved into the large lounge area where a man at the piano was already playing. "Benny!" Danielle exclaimed. He looked up from the piano, waving her over. "Did MRD hire you?" The big man nodded. "It's a good gig." She leaned against the Steinway. His eyes looked down at the keyboard, but he was only pretending. "I see your boyfriend here, but it looks like he's with another date." "Proving your eyes are working." Benny shook his head, puffing up his cheeks in the classical, sad jazz piano-playing man look. "That's too bad. You want to tell me about it?" Danielle gave him a smile, asking him to scoot over. "Sure, we can belt out some Sorry Woe's Me song and get the audience to cry." Benny threw his head back and laughed, purposefully changing the song to Porgy and Bess's Summertime. "Oh, you're killing me," she groaned. He continued playing the Gershwin tune, expressing serious disappointment. "I could have sworn what you two had was for real." Danielle hummed along before answering. "It was. He wanted to get married." Benny's dark eyes glanced up at her, but his head stayed down. "Unfortunately, there's this little rule about not dating clients. It was either the job and taking care of my family back home, or staying with Andre and being unemployed." Benny shook his head low, the sorry wag of a man who was hired to convey emotions with a word and the touch of an ivory key. "Aw, man, that's brutal." She sighed. "I wanted him to wait until I had a year under my belt. He wanted me to quit. It ended with a lot of tears for me and a lot of anger for him." "You don't think that man shed tears?" His bushy eyebrows lifted in doubt. Danielle shrugged, glancing up from the piano. "Does he look like a man in pain?" As they both watched, Andre bent to whisper in the blonde's hair. A huge smile appeared on her face, then he and his date walked across the room to the outdoor patio. "A man's gonna have some lovin' somehow," he drawled. Danielle sighed with the truth of his words. He'd made peace with the end of their relationship. So should she. "Okay, Benny, you want to sing that duet now?" His eyes positively jumped out of their sockets, and he struck a chord. "Do these people know you can sing?" She shook her head shyly. "Well then," he said mischievously, "time to enlighten them. You ready, my dear?" "Hit me, baby," she said enthusiastically. It was time to move on.